Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a principal engineer on the Argo Workflows project. Today I'm going to show you a new feature in version 2.11 called events. An event is a way to submit a workflow template, i.e. create a new workflow, as a result of a message that comes in over a HTTP endpoint. This is basically a webhook. Not only do we support standard HTTP messages which meet the cloud event spec and therefore require an authorization header, we also support webhook requests from services like GitHub. GitHub requests, GitLab requests, Bitbucket requests don't contain an authorization header. Instead, they contain a signature, which is signed based on a secret, and we validate that secret for you automatically. Firstly, you'll need to create a workflow template. This example here I've called build it. What I will do is instead I'll just show you this in my editor here. This is a very straightforward template in the Argo namespace. Next, I need to create a new resource called a workflow event binding. This is a very basic example and contains two parts. First, an event selector, which determines whether or not an event can submit the workflow template, and the second, a reference to the workflow template. The selector's expression, I'll show you a bit more about this shortly. This is the most simplest one, true, and it's obviously a good one to start with. You can have a look at other data in the event, such as metadata. This is an example that would operate as a result of a push message. Let's update that. To use these, you'll need some additional permissions, specifically the ability to create and patch events so we can report errors, and the ability to get service accounts. These need to be given to the Argo server so it can do some additional work. These are the service account permissions are specifically needed for GitHub, GitLab, Webhooks. The standard ones you don't need. So this feature introduces a new endpoint. Here it is, described here. This is the events endpoint, which you can post events to. It requires a namespace and an optional discriminator after the slash here. You can see I've actually left the discriminator blank in this example. The payload of the message can be any JSON, typically a JSON object map, and the content type should be application.json. So let's execute this endpoint and see what happens. Okay, the endpoint returned 200 OK. That's because webhook events are processed asynchronously, so you get no feedback about success or failure from actually making it. To determine whether or not your webhook is successful, go into the timeline and see if it ran. You can also look at the logs, and you can also look at the events. And I'll just show you an example of that by creating a malformed webhook event binding. This is a Boolean expression. We can change this to something that doesn't work at all. I'll apply that. Then I'll execute the webhook endpoint again. You can see that no new workflows appeared. But if I go into an existing workflow, click on the notifications icon and show all, it'll show me the event here, and it'll explain why it's failed. That's slightly hidden away, which is why I'm showing you. Okay, let's fix that back up. Now, as I mentioned, you can also use GitHub and GitLab webhooks. I'll just reload this page because GitHub is having some issues today. To create a payload, you need to obviously configure this. You can add an additional discriminator onto the end of the URL. Again, this is empty. I put Argo as the namespace. Content type should be application.json, and the secret needs to be set up in a special secret map. I'll just show you that now. This particular secret, Argo Workflows Webhook Clients, should be created in the namespace of the template, and it should contain at least one entry for whichever account you're using. The name should be the name of the service account, and you should say what type it is. Here in this case, GitHub, but it can be other values, and of course the secret. Because this has an exclamation mark, it needs to be quoted. Obviously, I need to create a service account for GitHub, and then create a role binding from that service account to the appropriate role. In this case, I've called the role Submit Workflow Template, and the service account is github.com in the Argo namespace. The Submit Workflow Template role requires a couple of different permissions: the ability to list workflow event bindings, the ability to get workflow templates, and the ability to create a workflow. I hope those are all rather self-explanatory, but in case they're not, I'll just go over them quickly. To list workflow event bindings, when a message comes in, we authenticate the user, and we need to make sure that GitHub.com has the ability to list them. You can make this more specific by using a resource name if you want to reduce the number of workflow event bindings that might trigger. Then the ability to get a workflow template. That way you can get the templates that are mentioned in the workflow event bindings. And finally, the ability to create a workflow. This is a moderately broad permission. You can make this more fine-grained if you need to for higher security. Okay, now proof is in the pudding. So here's an example of a GitHub payload. As I mentioned, it has a special signature, which is the combination of the payload plus the secrets. That way we know that if two parties both know the secrets, then we can confirm that this message came from GitHub. And it also contains a GitHub event of issues here. These headers are available in the expression, but they're converted to lowercase. Okay, let's redeliver and see what happens. You can see it's triggered a new workflow there. Here ends the demo.